can try to give it a try, Bill, if you want. I've done some of that.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to make you the co-host then. So here in 1 second. The only thing is, every now and then people get disconnected, let them back in. If you see somebody whose name totally don't recognize from the past, just ask them a chat, what brings you here? And hopefully they say I'm here for the World's Fair, and then that's say I'm here to ruin Bill's day. So appreciate it. So appreciate everybody joining. I'm going to try to do this day without the headphones since I don't need the air conditioner. Appreciate everybody joining. We're going to see, share screen.
And before you go, Bill, how about RC and Mac 15? Know them?
Not offhand, so you might want to chat and just ask them who they are.
Okay.
All right. So let's see, share. All right, we're going to start again with the industrial zone. It dawned on me when I was looking at this map from last week, the area that's up here in orange in the industrial zone. Oh, I need to do one other thing. Hang on. Let me stop share 1 second. Throw everybody on mute. Okay, mute all. And Kenneth, you should be able to unmute yourself being a co-host. So yeah, you should be all set there. So again, dawned on me looking at this from last week is that it was interesting. If you looked at a map of the 39 World's Fair and the 64, the difference is that the federal and state area and the industrial area basically changed places. So down below, where we now see federal and state, we had a lot of the things like Westinghouse and electric industries, that sort of thing. But because it had taken on such a larger proportional amount of interest and basically survival of the fair, the industrial area became the big area and got promoted up to the prime spot around the fountain up there. So again, looking at our famous Time Life map, we're going to be visiting a bunch of these pavilions, finishing out our tour, which is going roughly alphabetical. But I'm going to start with one that I forgot last week, managed to skip by General Cigar. General Cigar was home to the Hall of Magic, as it says up here on the roof. And we just had the sad news this week that Mark Wilson, the magician behind the Hall of Magic, passed away this week. Mark had been a famous magician, had the television show, The World of Alakazam, introduced a lot of kids to magic. And he and his wife were very well known. Mark came out and worked on the pavilion. He did all the staging and magic shows. He recorded the narration that was done for it, taught the other magicians, and provided the props. But he did not do all the shows himself. It would be too mind-numbing for anybody to do that many. But as we're walking in, you get a display of these little cigar-type figures, advertising all the great things you can get. About 8 years ago, a guy got in contact with me. His uncle found these in a garage sitting in a box. He had worked for the company tearing the pavilion down, liked cigars, took them home, never had the heart to smoke them. So as far as World's Fair souvenirs, amazingly, these little figures do survive. And again, you had a magic show, several shows a day, the typical switch people out of locked boxes, cut them in half, that sort of thing. It was a very popular show and it was free, so it was a great thing to do. Outside was the smoke ring machine, and everybody, of course, remembers the buttons, meet me at the smoke ring. The smoke ring machine here is the big brown thing off to the side. And over here, you can see it trying to blow a little smoke coming out of, they repainted it in these stripes. Mark Wilson told a funny story that he was in charge of the whole thing, came up with the idea of the buttons as being something people would talk about because of the apparent mistake in it. So the week before the fair, everything was running late. Finally, the box of buttons came in and they all said, meet me at the smoke ring, no double D's. So he called the button vendor and said, what the hell did you do? I sent you this one set of, things. And the guy said, well, you misspelled it. You misprinted it. I fixed it for you. And he had to go ahead and get the buttons redone at the very last minute. And he said his warehouse, he probably still had a box of the original buttons. And his warehouse is about 10 miles north of me. I'd gone up there to meet him and get a tour of the place. And it's roughly like the Raiders of the Lost Ark. And he had every prop, every costume for every magic show and trick he had ever done. So just an amazing spot to spend a day. So sad that he's with us and no longer with us. He was a nice guy. Now the smoke ring machine occasionally did make perfect smoke rings. They found out that it rarely worked. It was about maybe 5% of the time. There was much more wind in Flushing Meadows than they had calculated on. One of the things, the machine was very noisy. It would work with a giant bellows, and it would get all together and push it out. And Mark would say, trying to do a magic show in there, and you're trying to describe to people, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And outside the building, every 8 minutes or so, you hear this boom as this thing would go off. So he said it was a great idea, lousy concept, but there is a rare picture of one of these smoke rings. So we're going to go back into the industrial area. IBM Great Pavilion. I will mispronounce his name for sure, but I think Eero Saarinen, the architect behind the building, and then the Eames, Charles and Ray Eames, did a lot of the other the show elements, things we'll look at. But if you look at this, it resembles a IBM Selectric typewriter ball. This was right as the Selectrics were coming out. It was a very new sort of typing that, you know, everybody for years and years had the traditional hit the key, the lever would go up, slap, go back down. Now this ball dancing around, and the fact that you could pop the ball out, put another ball in, get different fonts, different sizes was remarkable. So the pavilion was very much in design of that Selectric ball. And it was very prominent. It had a great spot overlooking the Pool of Industry, got a lot of attention. If you look down below it, there's what look like metal trees, and that's exactly what they intended to be, a forest of metal trees supporting this giant egg overhead. And we're going to go take a tour. We're joining this bunch of teachers who have come in from Long Island to spend a day learning about IBM and the fair. And the signs of interest, for everybody that talks about Disney inventing the Fast Pass, well, IBM actually had it here at the World's Fair. This sign is telling you that they have tickets for the people wall. You would come in, get your ticket, and then it had an electronic display later on telling you when your group was eligible to come back. So it had been so successful, and the lines were going in, jamming up the walkways in front of the pavilion, that they put this ride reservation system in place. Behind it, you see a number of booths. There's one over there that says Puppet Theaters, a number of others. These, again, were things that were designed by the Eames. There's a couple of shots of them here. Their work is so popular and so sought after. Here's a little information booth at the beginning, that a few years ago, the Henry Ford Museum acquired one of these for probably more money than I will ever make in a year. And it's a pretty simple little thing, but it's, you know, a little booth, little flags coming up. But just the way the whole design worked with simplicity and elegance was something sought after, as everything else they seem to put their touch to. So they had all sorts of charts telling you how computers work, starting with the ideas of computer logic, and you know, you have all these different concepts and theories they were trying to sell you. They started telling you here about how logic works. Again, a flow chart of what you do you do this, and you know, how do you figure out logic, that sort of thing. The thing that was really interesting, they had these mechanical puppet type shows. In this particular one, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson are trying to figure out a particular suspect who did this particular crime. These things all were moving parts. The arms would go up and down, back and forth, the heads would move. And at the end of it, they asked Sherlock Holmes how he was able to figure it all out. And not only is it elementary, he opens his cape and you can see he's got a computer inside. Probability machine was kind of interesting. When we worked on the Tomorrowland movie for Disney, this was something they decided that they wanted to recreate. And they actually built a working replica of this, about as exact as we could get it, that the archives has today. But the concept here was that no matter how many times you drop balls down from the top, and they have all these pegs that they can bounce through as they go on their way down, they're almost always going to end up in the exact same pattern. So you're going to end up with this curve, and you know, the whole thing was done. The little wheel on the side would raise up balls. Excuse me, my coach is here.
2 people have said that you're not in full screen mode.
Okay, I will see if I can put it in full screen mode. 1 second. Go back over here. Okay, there we should go to full screen mode. Hopefully there. So again, we built a replica of this for the film, and it was great trying to figure out. They didn't have the specifications on it, so sitting here with these pictures, trying to count exactly how many pegs high, how many pegs wide, that sort of thing. As you went into the pavilion, they had these singers entertaining you, all nestled among the trees to keep you spending the time as you're getting ready. And you would finally work your way up and get seated up on the people wall, which is an amazing form of entertainment. You can see it here. Everybody's crammed in. One thing about the people wall is the seating was rather tight. There was not a lot of space because they wanted to be able to fit, I think it fit 430 people, something like that at a time. But you didn't have a lot of room. So if you were a tall person, your knees were going to be right up against the thing in front of you. But nobody at this point knew what to expect. You just had come in, they sat you in this contraption, closed the doors, and what was going to happen next. And you can see quite a diverse crowd, all sorts of people, nobody knowing what they're going to see. And all of a sudden, from up above, a man starts coming down on a hydraulic lift. And he's dropping down from the ball into the front of the people wall. And he looks like he's having a great time getting ready for it. And he's going to be the host of the show. It's a he. There were no women doing this role back in '64. It's certainly changed by now. But he's going to be telling you upstairs, we're going to take you up. We're going to teach you all about computers and learn more about how logic works, that sort of thing. People outside the show are now seeing this guy hanging there, getting interest, and now he raises up, and the whole wall lifts up on giant hydraulic rams up into the theater. Hatch closes behind you. You're immersed in darkness, and you get a multimedia presentation about computers, logic, and how they work and how they were going to be changing our lives. One last view is people going up. IBM realized that this, it's interesting. IBM's motto is think, right? Famous sign. And somebody didn't think real well about the pavilion here, that at night, you just saw this kind of white blob, nothing really to distinguish it. And they realized that nobody at night, you could see very easily off to the left that was 7 Pavilion over there. You had other signs lighting up to tell you where GE was, but there was nothing here to tell you this was IBM. So they quickly rushed in some crews, threw up some scaffolding. They chiseled out the IBMs every couple feet along the way, put the light up versions of the logo in there. So at night, now all of a sudden, IBM was able to get their logo seen across the fairgrounds. Just further down, another one, again, people wanted to put their logo up. So the World's Fair, 64 World's Fair was really big on towers. You had all sorts of towers and poles. Everybody's saying, meet me at this tower, meet me at that tower. Well, Johnson Wax had a very large tower here to let you know where they were. And behind it was the Golden Rondelle Theater. This shot kind of shows how the theater was actually suspended in the air. If you go back to the first shot, it's not as apparent that it's not a big thing sitting on the ground, but this was kind of neat. You're going up in there with fountains underneath. And inside, you got to see a award-winning movie, To Be Alive. Movie actually won an Academy Award, although it was shown at the World's Fair. They had been smart. If you show the film in a theater, you can qualify yourself for Academy Award consideration, and they were able to do it, and it became a big hit. And again, a great presentation. They used multiple screens. At times, the images would be 3 different things going on 3 different screens. At other times, they would go off and do something pasted across them. All of a sudden, one of these 3 screens might drop out, and now you have 2 things going on, then it goes back to 3 things. It was very, very well done. After the fair ended, the theater was taken apart, taken back to the company headquarters in Wisconsin, and you can still see it today. Now, this next publicity photo, it's after this one. The next publicity photo I got a real kick out of. I mean, it's kind of horrifying to look in these kids' faces. And the publicity campaign says that the kids are enthralled, but the men in the back row look very worried. To me, the kid in the center, he has one set of braces. It looks sort of reminded me of Jaws from the James Bond movie. It looks like he's got a mouthful of metal. But so To Be Alive, that got quite a reaction. When you came out of it, there was a fun house for kids. You could play the fun machine. If you push a certain button, you got a certain sound. The other nice thing was everybody could get a free shoe shine if you wanted to. They had machines there as long as you're wearing black and brown shoes. They had preloaded with polish, and you could get a free shoe shine. And it was very popular. Here's a line for it stretching way down the promenade here. I think this is the Johnson Promenade, but very popular show. Not as well remembered as another J, Julimar Farm. A concept here was that they recreated 9 different types of gardens. And Julimar was hoping that people would go there, buy, you had to pay admission, the gals outside, I think it was $0.10 to get in. But you could then go and look at a catalog and say, hey, I'd really like to have a cactus garden. I'd like to have a New England garden. I'd like to have a formal garden. And this is looking down from the Better Living Center. Very, pretty picturesque sort of area. Did not open right on time. And I know for the 65 season, they opened late because the weather was so cold that a lot of the plants weren't growing. But inside you could walk through, again, you had brochures telling you what all the different plants were. You could go and order them. I got a kick out of this. Proved again back in 64, people didn't listen any better than they listened in 65, in 2001 now, or 21 rather. Telling you, we suggest you do not approach the horses, right? Because they may bite. So of course, what does everybody do? They come out and they immediately touch the horses. So Julimar Farms was not a success. It's actually interesting if you try to do research on the number of people that had pavilions at the fair that are not with us, and Julimar would be one of them. A lot of these places have just not survived over time. That they went bankrupt or did not get to stay with us. So Mastro Pizza was another interesting situation. Back in 64, pizza was not a mass-produced sort of item. You might have it in a local Italian restaurant, but it was not the sort of thing today. You certainly don't have Domino's and that sort of thing. So this fellow, Vinny Mastro, came up with the idea of, he made pizza ovens, and he was trying to sell more and more pizza ovens to restaurants and not getting a lot of traction because everybody had the idea that pizza took way too long to make, way too long to cook, and was a low profit item. Vinny put this pavilion out at the World's Fair to showcase his pizza ovens. His main interest was selling ovens, not the actual pizzas, but he had a whole film made about how to make pizzas and how it could be a profitable item. And it became a big hit. And it turns out that Mastro pizza ovens are still well sought after today. Unfortunately, I think I've got a picture of him here. Yeah, here's the proud businessman walking with his briefcase outside his pavilion. He had a heart attack. I think he died at 46, and the business is no longer with us. I scanned this picture for his son. But it's amazing. If you go back, there's actually sites that trace the history of pizza developing as a large-scale, popular food across the United States. And it's like a giant matrix, and everything goes back to Mastro Pizza. So for those of us that like our slice of pepperoni, or for those of us that are sacrilegious like our Hawaiian pizzas, we owe a big debt to Vinny. And this is just outside the shop. Obviously, they spent very little on decor, but the pizza was very popular, and there's lots of pictures of people sitting out here and eating away. Gonna go down now. We saw Kodak last week, but there's another shop in front of it, the Meadow Camera Shop. They had a pavilion at the 39 World's Fair, and they were able to get the contract to be the official film supplier to the World's Fair. At this point in time, Kodak sold to wholesalers. They didn't sell directly to the consumers. So Meadow worked as a intermediary, and you could go in, you could buy cameras here, you could buy film here. They also sold, of course, souvenir slides and other items. And they encourage you to take pictures, because the more pictures you took with a smile and brought them back home for your relatives, the more film they were selling. So again, another business that's not with us, but they were big at that point in time. Mormon Pavilion, they had an amazing recreation of the church from Salt Lake City. Take a look at the panels of cloth off to the side. They were supposedly to recreate the skyline, that sort of thing. More accurately, they were trying to block the infamous A&P sign that drove Robert Moses crazy. But they kept trying to get this to work. So here we can see in this one, it looks like there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 panels off on the side. In this particular location, you can see that they were not always up because, again, like others, they found out Flushing Meadows can be a lot windier than anticipated. But in some shots, there's 2 panels, and in other shots, there's 4. They kept trying to perfect this and get it to work, and it was never a system that really did what it was supposed to do. But here is an idea of, it was not solidly blocking the sky because they tried to make it a mesh so that the wind wouldn't rip it out, but it would give you the feeling of blocking out the unsightly scenes outside the park from it. Down below, they had a big flower garden, changed out the flowers constantly, and this was all done by local Mormon church groups. There'll be little signs that the flowers this particular week or month are presented by the members of this particular church. So there are always bright colors out here. During the drought that hit New York, I think it was mostly in '65, they had to drain the fountain, but they were still putting flower displays out there to give it some color. Inside, you had displays about the Mormon religion, they would come and give you tours of it if you're interested in learning more about potentially converting. There were rooms you could sit in and they would talk to you about it. And they had all sorts of both paintings and 3D displays about the church. Here, their founder is getting the word that he used to create the religion. Again, paintings. And the statue, this is a statue called Christus. Very well done marble piece, which is actually out here at the Mormon Church in Los Angeles. So it's if you're in the Westwood area and you go by, you can see this piece of World's Fair memorabilia over at the church. They also had the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. This is actually the Mormon's Women's Choir. They came in there performing, not at their own pavilion, but this is in the pavilion that was aptly named the Pavilion, discussed last week, later became the Winston Churchill Pavilion. But this is, again, a sort of an example of what they would do in the pavilion. And this group came in from Salt Lake City, but other Mormon churches would come and perform here as well on a periodic basis. Moving down the road to NCR, National Cash Register, they were trying to go with the NCR logo as their name to try to convince people they were not just cash registers. They were trying to make a big push into computers at the time, so NCR became the big thing. At prior World's Fairs, they were the ones who were famous for having giant cash registers that showed you the attendance of the World's Fair. Here they went with more of a technology and less of a cash register appearance. The building's actually an amazing design. You got these 3 white pylons out there, and the building, the roofs were held up by cables that went to those pylons. That meant you had a tremendous amount of floor space inside the pavilion that you could put displays without the need for pillars, columns, or poles holding the upper stories up. So this World's Fair, people were trying out all sorts of innovative design and building techniques, and NCR was very well advanced in doing that. That's the Lunar Fountain in front of us. By the way, I like to joke with people about restoring pictures. You can have a lot of fun with your computer. So if you're going to get a picture of something like the Lunar Fountain, and you go, well, that's a great fountain, but I have no idea who that lady is, and why on earth do I want to keep a picture of her? You can just use your computer and you can send people to the cornfield for people that were Twilight Zone fans. Great Pavilion again at night. Mentioned in other talks, you can sometimes get a peek inside the pavilions at night because the lights inside, the sunlight doesn't glare off it. You can see inside. And this is some of the displays they had inside. They had the concept NCR. We were going to have liquid gates inside of computers where you could do your switching based on water pressure or fluid pressure within the computer. And they obviously, our computers today are generally not water operated. They also did have electronic computers too, but this was a theory they were doing. Oh, hey, I won the lottery. I didn't realize it. No. Obviously, I don't live in Michigan. I didn't win it. Sorry for the phone ringing. They will go away. They were also demonstrating other things like optical character recognition. This is something we all take for granted today, but back in 1964, this was a new concept. So this woman here showing, she's holding up a letter 7 on a piece of plastic. A light beam is going through it and reading the number 7 up on the screen. And she would demonstrate it by showing, holding up other numbers, letters, and showing you how computers could scan characters and recognize them. They were also showing how you could shrink everything down, the entire Bible stuck on a something smaller than a credit card, again, for ways you could retrieve data. This was one of about encapsulation, how you could take different type of chemicals, combine them together, put them on paper, and this became NCR paper, the carbonless paper that we all take for granted today. You go and you sign something and the little bubbles break on the layer of paper beneath you, change colors, and you have the, the copy. All of a sudden, not have to use carbon paper was a huge thing, very, very popular, as you can imagine, with the secretaries across the world. And you could come down and you could go to their computer here. You could type in a particular date or recipe. They had 3 different ones here. You could get things that were done on a certain date. You could get things about famous places of the world, or you could get recipes, and the NCR computer in the background is faithfully going to print out one of these cards. You can rip it off and take it home. And even though they had tried to drop down the priority of cash registers, they had all their equipment on display, and it became a hugely popular thing for kids to be able to go and play with cash registers and push the buttons. And I still have a bunch of the paper tape that comes out of these things and the NCR thing. And I think all my sales were for $999,999, but it was a popular item. Now, although we're in the industrial area, there were some pavilions were scattered around that were not necessarily industrial in nature, and the Oregon Timber Carnival is one of them. And the reason was they wanted access to water so they could do shows out on the waterfront and do some log rolling. So they did a big thing. They brought people in here. They showed you how they could cut these things both with saws real fast. They would be showing contests of throwing axes, both single and double bladed axes. And then they would do log rolling. If you go to my site, it's actually interesting. There was a big dispute between the guys that ran it for 1964 and the guys that ran it for 1965. I've got the paperwork out there. And one guy trying to wrap up and get all the rights to everybody that knew how to log roll on the East Coast, because he was trying to be the controlling guy of the show. So funny that you don't think about, everybody's after Google or Amazon today for antitrust. But in 1964, they were doing, trying to do the same thing on log rolling. Parker Pen had a neat display of basically pens and that sort of thing. As you can imagine, they had displays of pens from around the world's most wanted pens over time. This is right at the time where people are still using fountain pens. The Bic pens and the ubiquitous ballpoint pens were just coming along. But mostly these pens here, they're trying to sell you cartridge pens. You could either fill the fountain pen with the old style with a lever that you suck up the ink out of a bottle, or these newfangled pens you stick an ink cartridge into, sort of the version of a laser jet or inkjet printer. We'll sell you the pen and then we'll make a fortune on selling you the ink. But they also had a big thing that was very popular. These hostesses are all here with an application for the Pen Pal program. And you would come in, you would fill out a Pen Pal form. The sign here tells you this how to be 12 and over. And there's a computer, you can see it in the background there. You would stick this thing, form in there, whether you like to read books or you like sports or you like spicy food or whatever the questions were. And they would match you up with somebody else from around the world. And there's still some people today that say they're still in touch with their pen pals 50 plus years later. So again, computer matching, this was their version of computer dating, I guess, at the time. We go further down the road, the Pavilion of America Interiors. This was another one of those multi-purpose pavilions, just like the Better Living Center. That the idea here is, again, you could go and see all sorts of housing displays, kitchens and living rooms and dining rooms, and you could then get a catalog, go and buy the stuff when you got back home. It's interesting, if you look at the middle story of this, you can see down on the first floor there's a bunch of furniture. Up top there's a restaurant, and nothing in the middle because they were having a heck of a problem renting out the space. So what they ended up doing over time was putting this big sign up over the middle set of windows, so you didn't realize there wasn't anything in there. But here was again the restaurant. They have both an indoor and an outdoor area. You could sit upside and eat. This area became the Fiesta Area for 1965. We saw last week where we had different people dancing, lots of snack bars and that. But this was another unsold area for 64 that was just a giant sheet of blacktop. And again, let's cover up the window so nobody realizes there's nothing on that floor, and we'll just take you right past it. This is kind of interesting. Little shot right outside that area. People, again, we have such a high-tech area for the World's Fair with the people living on the moon, going to undersea hotels. But somebody said, hey, I've got this unused piece of grass and I can bring in a bunch of ponies. So in 64, you could come here and rent a pony and take your kids for a pony ride. In 65, they had a go-kart track that you could race around here. So separate from the go-kart track we saw last week, this was a very crude, stripped-down version of karts, and they periodically brought people in to do kart races. Then something of interest, of course, the Disney folks. So it comes out in Disney, It's a Small World. For Glenn Barker, who chastised me yesterday because I said small world in uppercase, you'll notice here it's a small world is in lowercase. That is the true Disney way to do it. So if you are ever writing about small world, it is in lowercase. And if you've heard the talk I did about Disney and the World's Fair, part of this will be a broken record, so I apologize. But Pepsi was the last thing Disney did for the World's Fair. They had been very busy doing the other shows, the Ford show, GE, Mr. Lincoln, and that. And then Joan Crawford was on the board of Pepsi, and they had turned down, I think, 4, maybe 6 different companies and doing designs for Pepsi. And they had already started building the building, but they had no idea what was going to go in it. Joan called the Disney Studios, asked to speak to somebody about building a pavilion. She got General Potter on the phone, who was the head of construction for the World's Fair. He politely turned her down, said, we can't do it, we're too busy. A couple of weeks later, Joan and Walt were at a charity or society type function, and she said, gee, it's too bad you can't build that World's Fair show for me. Walt said, what World's Fair show are you talking about? Joan mentioned how she had called the studio and General Potter had turned her down. That Monday, Walt called them all in and made a big point of that his name was on this door of the gate to the studio, not theirs, and he was going to make the decisions what got built and not got built. So all of a sudden, the race was on with just about a year to go for Small World. Got a kick when I was working on the Tomorrowland movie. They were super glad to find this picture because they had to recreate this scene at the beginning of the fair. And they're sitting out there trying to color match what colors the booth are. They really went to a lot of detail to get the fonts exactly right to match this. So in this particular case, we're lucky we got a good shot of the booth. But in others, it was hard because there were so many people online for the show. It was a huge hit, absolutely spectacular attendance. Mickey's here. We had a bunch of the Disney characters, I think about 6 of them each year presenting at the fair. Mickey is almost always seen upstairs on this railing area here because he had been down on the ground, and a bunch of New York kids decided, hey, it would be really fun to take Mickey and go off and throw him in one of the fountains. There's interesting, Mickey can freely wander the streets of Disneyland without getting accosted. In New York, it wasn't very long at all, within the first month that he got banished up here to the roof. So he'd wander around, wave to people, try to get their attention, but he was always up there safely out of the way. The other Disney characters were lucky they didn't get chucked in the fountains. They would come down and meet you on the ground. You notice here we have one gal doing Alice, and then we'd have a different gal doing Alice. They later decided with some of these characters, they would go with more just the costume characters as opposed to the live characters, because then they didn't have to worry about interacting with the guests, not having a British accent if you were Alice, or sometimes they would literally grab somebody, throw them in the costume, and they had no idea what the backstory of the characters were or what they were doing. So they downplayed the live people and went more to the so-called head figures in later time. And again, great character time wandering around. Pluto was a little mischievous this particular day. I imagine the people from OSHA would have a heart attack. He got tired of being down on the ground, so he not only went up to Mickey's little area up there, but he climbed up on top of the sign. If you've ever worn one of those costumes and know how top heavy they are and how restrictive they are, I can safely tell you whoever was in the suit of this particular day was really pushing the envelope. And some of that worked there said, yeah, they found out about it and he never, ever, ever did that one again. Again, we're going to go and take the ride now for the movie again. Super interested in finding out what kind of things they had in terms of the costumes, the pins, the hats. Mentioned this before that Disney has wonderful archives in almost everything that they've ever done except the World's Fair, because it was designed by WED, now known as Imagineering, paid for by the studio, operated by Disneyland, and they all thought somebody else was saving all the records. So they were amazed to find out that they had colored capes for these hostesses to wear in the cooler weather, that they had these very nice white dresses to wear in the rest of this time. And we're going to get on the boat. This was a new development from Arrow Ride Corporation, something Disney had worked on with them to really have tremendous throughput, getting a massive number of people through a show in a particular period of time that you could not do if people were going to walk through it. They didn't have conveyor systems like the doom buggies, things we know today. So the boats are very popular. And we're going to go and take a quick look. I'm glad I have everybody muted so that when you're all singing the song and it's going through your head, I don't have to hear it. But here's how the ride looked at the 64 fair. So down at the entrance again, where we saw the ladies standing with their hats, you would wander through this set of ramps and everything onto the loading platform, get into it, and we're going to go into take a look at some of the inner areas. You'll notice that there is less areas on this map than what exists in the small worlds that we have today. Again, Walt had to fit whatever he was doing within the confines of a building that was already under construction. When the ride was taken back out to Disneyland, they added on additional segments to it. So the ride we have now at Disneyland, which has been copied at the other theme parks, is a longer set of experience than we have there. But all these people have gotten on this. They can hear the music coming from the tunnel as they're heading in. And this is the first view that they see. And you can imagine the magic that this was. We're going into the Great Britain section. You've got the stuff all over the place. The characters are all singing, moving, dancing. The soldiers here going. And it's a well-known story that the song Small World came about because the initial concept was that each of these lands, as you went through, you would hear the national anthems being played and sung by the children of that area. And they found that the music, as you got from one of those lands to the next one, it was just a clash of concepts and jarring on the ears. So the Sherman brothers were brought in to do one song that could go seamlessly throughout the entire attraction. And despite my mocking it and making fun of it, it's a brilliant piece of work that they did, and it's still heard. I think it's every minute of the day when the theme parks are able to be open. It's playing constantly somewhere around the world. So again, you went through, you had amazing work that they did with all these figures. When I do the talk on the building of the World's Fair, I have quite a few shots of them building these dolls and sets, and the fact that they had to have makeup artists come in and touch up their lips and everything to get done. But it was a very popular thing. Now, one thing that they realized they made a mistake on doing this was this railing that ran all the way around the attraction. Kind of ungainly, unsightly. Matter of fact, if you have some pictures from some of the boat views, it's very hard to get a good picture because that railing's there. What they had done was they had put this walkway all around the attraction so that if they needed to evacuate, they could take people out of the boats and walk them out of there. And they had the railing so they didn't fall off into the attractions. When they moved it out to Disneyland, they redid the ride. They used the same trough system for the in the same boats, but you don't have this walkway. You don't have the metal rails. If I jump back a picture or two, you can also see things like the air conditioning vents, things like that are much more hidden away and disguised than they were. Again, this was because they were working with an existing building and things like ductwork and that sort of stuff. They couldn't drill holes in the concrete floor to bring up air conditioning ducts because the floor was already set and done. So they had to go and work with what they had. So the 64 World's Fair version of Small World was a bit cruder, but it was very well done and very well received. Now we're going out through the grand finale and heading on out. When you get back out, we're at the Tower of the Four Winds, the famous construction that Rolly Crump designed. Talked about it again on the talk with the Disney and the World's Fair. It was done with a yellow framework for 64 and 65. They redid it with white, make it a little more appealing on the eye. This was a kinetic sculpture. For those that are new to it, it was blown by the winds. So those winds that were pesky to everybody else in Flushing Meadows became a popular thing here because all these things, there were no motors, nothing mechanical in this. This was all done by the wind. So it would spin these circles around. The birds would move, fish would go back and forth. It was all done with wind power. And it was, again, very attractive. And it became a popular thing. If you were trying to meet your party, you would tell us, meet me at the Tower of the Four Winds. And again, mentioned earlier, everybody had a tower, but nobody had a tower as successful as the Disney Tower of the Four Winds. Kind of closer view of some of the pieces of it. Down below at the base of the tower, you had a VIP lounge. We have Snow White and 4 of the dwarfs here. Snow White is the one of the things that's an interesting World's Fair souvenir, because she later became Mrs. Dick Nunes, who is the man that was in charge of Disneyland and Disney World. They met at the World's Fair, fell in love, and she became a full-time member of the Disney family. But if you were inside, you might get entertained. If you were a VIP, you got all the free Pepsi you could drink. And the characters would come in from outside, turn around and entertain you and have some fun with you. So you can imagine that all these kids enjoying their soda and everything, they got a special show because the dwarfs were realizing that whoever got them in there was probably helped pay for the whole thing. Down below, you had a UNICEF shop. Again, the whole concept of this was that although they charged admission, the profits for operating the ride went to UNICEF, a committee for the United Nations. Down below, you could buy dolls of Small World characters. You could also get free brochures on what UNICEF and other United Nations programs were. The characters, again, came down here to operate, entertain folks. And in the background, you see one of the major reasons that Pepsi was there was to convince you wanted to get a Pepsi. So the slogan they were using back at that time, say Pepsi please, before the Pepsi generation became popular. But people would be very happy. This young lad looks like he's really thankful that he's got his hands on a nice cold Pepsi and he's having a great time. We'll move on to another one. Again, not everything was industrial. In this particular case, we had a number of religious pavilions in here. The Protestant Orthodox Center striking pavilion. This shot, again, nighttime shows more that you can see inside. That stained glass window, I think the next shot shows it more. I got a call or an email actually a number of years ago for a church that was had built this window for the World's Fair. Their church is being built in '64, and they wanted to have this window, so they commissioned the window for their church, but also sent it first to the World's Fair for display for 2 years. Built their church in '64, but left a giant hole in the wall covered in plywood. When the fair was over, they took the window back out, installed it in their church. They found out that the sun was too hot for it. It was melting the lead seams and the stained glass. So they covered it over with a piece of plastic from the outside to cut down the amount of heat and sunlight hitting it. And they were looking to reconstruct it and get a fundraising campaign to do it. And I asked if I had a picture of the thing. I sent it to them. They said, great, you know. And I said, where is your church, by the way? I'd like to let everybody know that this still exists. And I said, oh, we're in Granada Hills, California. At which point my jaw dropped, hit the ground, because I live in Granada Hills, California. I've been driving by this church. It's about 4 miles away from me. I've been driving by it for about 28 years and never knew it was there. Immediately ran over, took pictures of it and everything, and it's still there, preserving. The church is every now and then and on for sale, off for sale. They're trying to figure out what to do with the property. And one of the big things they're trying to do is they sell it is to find a home for this window. So if anybody would really like to have a World's Fair souvenir, let me know and I can try to hook you up. Inside, they also had displays of various things about the churches, the different Protestant denominations that were participating in it. They had this very elegant carved wood figure of the Last Supper, which at some point in time, somebody said, oh, we got tired of answering questions, who's who on it. So they put the names of who's everybody there. The fact that you had to put a sign to tell everybody who Jesus Christ was kind of interesting. They also had a very interesting movie called The Parable, which created a lot of controversy because they were talking about religion during the parallel to slideshows, forms of entertainment. A lot of people liked it, so other people hated it. It was a very controversial film done at the time. Now, Wayne, I'm glad you're sitting down because we're going to get to your pavilion here. Wayne's a big TV enthusiast. RCA had a great pavilion. As soon as you walked into the grounds, this was right at the entrance from the Gotham Plaza, and you could come and see yourself on color television. And again, we all have color TVs in our pockets now on our phones, but in 1964, this was a big thing. Wow. I mean, color TV was really something. So I had a full-time studio in here. Here's somebody doing a show about a zoo and a bunch of turtles down below. This is a puppet show going on. They had shows that were broadcast all throughout the New York area on, I think it was WNEW was the public broadcasting station for the time. So people would come in and do singing, they would play the piano, anything that was being done out there. But one of the things that was really great was you could see yourself on color TV. These people are stepping on a platform that rotates, and they're going to be going around with this colored backdrop showing up behind them, and they get to see themselves on color TV. And the way it was done was kind of interesting. There was no digital way at that point in time that you would walk around, get your picture taken, and then 5 seconds, 10 seconds later, when you got to the next part of the thing, you'd see yourself. They actually took 2 large-scale videotape recorders. If you look here, there's a supply reel on the left and take-up reel all the way on the one on the right, and a little box in between. And basically, it was the amount of time that it took to get from the one machine through the little box onto the other machine that it would tape delay it long enough for you to see it when you got to the next part of the display. When the World's Fair ended, some engineer took home this reel of tape and later found it 50 years later. They had to go and find a machine to restore it. If you go on YouTube, you can actually watch a minute or so of people from 1964 seeing themselves at the World's Fair, many of them with cigarettes in their hand and enjoying it as they walk through the pavilion. Another pavilion down the road, totally different thing, where we went from the new technology of RCA to the old technology of Rheingold, one of the beers that was very popular in New York at the time. They had little old New York. You had an old bandstand. Periodically, bands would come out and play out there. But the real satisfaction, besides shops, you could go and buy clothes and men's clothes, women's clothes, that sort of thing. Again, kind of a nice recreated, kind of reminds me a little bit of their version of Main Street USA. But the main thing, of course, it's a beer place, so you could get beer. So I get a kick out of seeing these things. You had Tuborg beer, another one of the brands that they sold, pretzels for 15 cents. You could enjoy your beer and pretzels as you were getting entertained by the Keystone Cops here. Inside the Post House restaurant was their major restaurant there. Not an elegant restaurant, but it was supposed to be the sort of thing that you would have in the turn of the century New York, a speakeasy. Go in and get it. And I get a kick out of this one because it's mostly men, because the women are just down the road at one of the neighboring pavilions, the Clairol Pavilion. And outside, lots of benches, come out, have a beer. Somebody asked me yesterday, why are there so many pictures of people drinking beer at the 64 World's Fair? Well, again, New York and the New York humidity and heat and everything made a cold beer a very popular attraction for a lot of people. Totally different thing, again, in the industrial zone, but they put things where they had space for them. This was the Russian Orthodox Church, recreation of a church from Northern California. And they had this little kiosk off over the side that you could buy different recreated icons, jewelry, things along that line. So kind of different sort of thing with all the other high-tech things going on. That's the Better Living Center hidden behind it. More beer, the Schaefer Center. We're looking down again from the Better Living Center. and they had their own Hall of Fame out here, which was not movie stars, it was sports stars. So almost every week they had some famous sports star. Here's Rocky Graziano coming out, signing autographs for people. They could then also get their names put into concrete. I've not been able to find anybody that has any idea where any of these concrete slabs went after the end of the fair, but it was very popular. You could come out here and meet Casey Stengel. Another time you could come back might be Roger Maris. So for New York sports fans to actually meet your heroes and talk to them in person was a huge hit, very popular. So even if you didn't drink beer, a lot of kids took their parents to Schaefer. Inside, it a very nice restaurant, table service. Actually, this wasn't table service. In the back, you can see it was a giant buffet, but they did have table service for beer. They had a display inside of how Schaefer beer was made. They also had a similar display at Freedom Land at the time. And outside, you could get all the beer brought to you. Again, you had to pay for it. It wasn't free, but you could sit there and spend your day just enjoying it. They had a big open bar. These sailors are in town for Fleet Week, and they're enjoying their time at the fair. They were making a point they had the biggest bar at the fair. And lots of people just like to sit down at Schaefer. And now for anybody that's from New York, you can have the Schaefer jingle singing in your head. Moving along, we get the Scott Paper. Scott Paper, as you imagine, they made paper. And they had this whole thing about how they were going to go and show people how trees are great for the forest, for all the forest lives and all the elves and everything that live there. But we manage our forest well. We just don't indiscriminately chop down everything. We have planned forests that will provide paper, but will also provide some sort of home for the wildlife creatures. And you'll enjoy it and be able to get paper products. Another tower mentioned earlier, everybody at Tower, 7-Up had a very prominent one. They didn't have the same amount of money or advertising budget that Coke or Pepsi did, so they went with a different sort of concept that they would provide a very popular eating area under these structures outside where you could eat, have bands playing. A lot of these bands played for free. 7-Up was very smart. They would not pay you to perform there, but you got entertainment value, name value, and maybe somebody would recognize you and sign you to a paying gig later on. But they had a thing where you could get these different sandwich trays. You get different 4 realms of the world. So you could say, I'm going to get the Northern European platter. You could get one of those with these different types of sandwiches on it. 4 different sandwiches on each platter, all the 7-Up you want. And they gave you very small cups, somebody mentioned, so you didn't just fill it up and walk around for the rest of the day. But it was a very popular thing. Somebody was just the other day looking to do something to recreate menus for this, and they did pass out menu brochures there as well. And they also overhead did 7-Up skywriting. Again, they didn't have the budget that Coke had, but they were a very innovative company and went out of their way. Simmons was kind of an interesting one. I mentioned in my notes for the fair, building a World's Fair Pavilion. Every now and then you have to stop and think what people were thinking about. So for Simmons, they came by and they had this display, famous beds of famous people in bed. So you can come and see what kind of bed Attila the Hun supposedly slept in, what kind of bed Cleopatra slept in. I don't know how on earth they figured out what Attila the Hun's bed was, but they were showing you how everybody, no matter what your walk of life, if you slept on a Simmons mattress, you slept like a king. So they had this cute little display. But then upstairs, they had these rest alcoves where you could then come in and rent an alcove and take a nice 15 to 30-minute nap. And this hostess would come in and change the sheets in between each person. And I can imagine that you'd say, okay, I'm going to go to the World's Fair. I'm going to pay for parking. I'm going to pay admission. And now in the middle of the day, I'm going to go take a 30-minute nap. Today's world, of course, would be all sorts of people who would want to be joining the Simmons Club. And, they were strictly 1 person per room. And it was not very popular. They really downplayed it for the 65 season, but that was the big drawing. Come out to the Simmons Pavilion and go to sleep. They also had a kind of interesting thing which didn't last particularly long. Sort of a longer shot here, but we look in, you could go and get your picture taken with the Simmons, I guess it's an elf, For the folks that sometimes talk about the early Disneyland costume characters being rather different, I thought this was one that they could have used some improvement in making this one a little bit more less frightening, shall we say. Singer Ball, this big giant amphitheater, overhead view of it, you can see how large this thing was. Didn't get a lot of use during the fair. This is a shot of opening day for the 65 season, big ceremony. Everybody here to come in and see the fair reopen. But a lot of other days were like this. This was actually Miss Civil Servant Day, and you did not get a lot of people. It could have been a really popular venue. If they brought in rock concerts and bands and things, a lot of people could have enjoyed it. But again, Robert Moses wasn't for that. So the majority of the 64, 65 season, this facility was very underutilized. Down below, they had a displays about how you can get your sewing machines and other things they had. Most of this after the fair was used for a while for tennis and has now been completely consumed by the Arthur Ashe Tennis Center that is taken over a large part of the that corner of the fairgrounds. So again, it was a very well-designed facility, absolutely underutilized because Robert Moses just did not want rock music blaring into the night at any of his at his fair. He did like a different type of music. This was another area that was not immediately leased out, a big empty area, and he was able to get Tipperilla to sponsor this band pavilion. You can see some pianists up there in the stage getting ready to perform. You had all sorts of singing groups would come in and perform, but the major thing was Guy Lombardo and his Royal Canadians. There's Guy off to the right standing there. Guy was a popular, personal favorite of Robert Moses. He performed constantly out at the Jones Beach Theater, the amphitheater out there. And this was part of what caused problems with the 64 fair, that Moses was so stuck in what he liked, and he went with people like Guy Lombardo that a bunch of the parents would like it. But this Guy Lombardo, he lived in the town next to me. He was a nice guy, and you'd see him around. You'd listen to his music, but it wasn't the sort of thing a 14, 15-year-old kid would just beat the doors down to convince the parents to buy yet one more ticket to go to the fair to hear the Royal Canadians. So again, next door to that was the Tower of Light, one more tower. Got an interesting sculpture here going up across the entranceway and going up. You can see it lit up here at night. After the fair ended, the artist that built this got a letter from or a phone call from a guy that, hey, I bought your sculpture from the World's Fair, and the artist was thrilled that he's going to get a chance to rebuild this sculpture, which was all done with these hanging from these very thin steel wires. Turned out the guy didn't want to rebuild the sculpture. He just wanted to know what kind of steel was in the pipes because he wanted to know when he melted it down. So sort of sad. But inside you had a display about electricity with Ben Franklin as a light bulb. And he would take you through the various things, how electricity was a wonderful sort of thing. He would entertain. You had all sorts of barnyard critters singing and dancing. This is it was also Reddy Kilowatt. I don't know if I had a picture of Reddy in the very beginning. He was the character created by the different electric industries to be a spokes character for why you should get electric heat in your house, that sort of thing. Two shots taken here in quick succession of the Tower of Light, showing how the whole thing could change from one shot to another just by the way they changed the lights on the building. The major attraction, though, is this giant candle, I think 1 million candle power beam of light that would shoot into the sky. On a nice clear night, it was very visible throughout the fairgrounds and throughout the New York area. They would have different celebrities would come in. So if you were a VIP, or if you were a heavy investor in electric power or facilities, you'd get to throw the switch and then make a big thing. Now it's Mr. Kenneth Carpenter turning on the Tower of Light. Boom, the beam of light would come on, and you get a certificate that you would turn on the Tower of Light. Down the road, we're going to go see Travelers Insurance, who is very popular for the Triumph of Man. We're looking at it here from its next door neighbor, the Bell System. And they had a whole display of major things in man's development. Here they're discovering fire. Here it's showing how warfare has been part of mankind and we need to overcome that. The Black Plague was a particularly dark point of time. If anybody has one of those red records that from Travelers Insurance and you think you discovered a amazing piece of World's Fair memorabilia, they gave these out by the bajillions. After the fair ended, all these dioramas were taken to another museum, which I'm having a mental blank on where it was, but they then gave them out there for years as well. So very popular World's Fair item because it was free. And we're getting down near the end of the day. The United States Post Office, they had this display. You can see Mr. Zip. We tell him, take a trip with Mr. Zip. Again, things we take for granted. The zip code is brand new in 64, trying to convince people to do it. Inside, there were all sorts of sorting machines. The one that they just ripped out that would do scanning of mail and sorting. In here, this is all a new automated process. Instead of having everything done by hand, it was automated. This building is still in place, one of the very few World's Fair pavilions to exist. You think about, gee, I'd like to have kept the General Electric Pavilion, or I'd like to have kept the Tower of Light. No, they kept the United States Post Office Pavilion, which is now used as a warehouse by the New York City Parks Department. Outside at this point, you had different letters where mailboxes. You could go and show you a mailbox from Sweden or Norway or different parts around the world that they got them to donate, and they had little things explaining how their mail system worked. And it takes us back around, wow, just about an hour on time. So let me stop sharing here. Oh, good, there's still people there. Always worry about that. So let me, 67 chats. I don't know if I'll catch up. The Science of Industry in Ohio. That's where I thought it was, but I didn't want to get it wrong. So thank you for doing it. So before I look through the chats, any questions, comments? Again, just wave your hand, throw up your hand, and Irv, let's ask you to unmute here. There you are. Yes, I can.
That Jane Parker sign you talk about so much, did that company actually enlarge it or heighten the sign just for the purpose of displaying it at the fair?
No, I don't think so. I think it was just there, and they were lighting it up and making a big thing about it. And Moses wanted them to turn it off, and he refused to do it. So I got in the big thing court battle, and he lost. So he went out of his way to try to block it, but putting fences up at some points, hedges up in others. But I like Moses for a lot of things he did, but he drew more attention to that sign by his court battle than if he had not done it. So he actually made the sign more famous by hating it than he would have if he had just ignored it.
Okay.
So who else? Oh, okay, Dave. You have to unmute Dave. There you go.
So let's cut to this one.
Oh, the entrance to a Small World?
And there's Julie Andrews. They did a special at the opening, before the opening of Walt Disney World when I was there. And so here's Julie. Sorry it's so blurry, but of course it's just my album. But you can see it's Capitol.
Ah, yeah, somebody made a mistake. Need to go fix that.
Well, I don't know. It probably was like that for a long time.
Well, that's because they didn't have Glenn chasing after him like he had.
Right.
I say I
such a great talk, Bill. I mean, it's just amazing. All of the one of the here's a little known fact. So when Tokyo Disneyland was built, and they were building the dolls for It's a Small World, the power line frequency at the location in Tokyo is 50 hertz. And the dolls are run by motors that run in sync with the power line frequency. So when they first installed it, before they actually opened it, like the sound was out of sync with the dolls because the dolls are moving slower. And of course, I guess it's one of those things that got overlooked. It got fixed, of course, but the fact that wait a minute, we've built all these dolls. Why is this a problem? And it's like, oh, the motor's running slower. So their dolls are moving slower. One of those things.
Funny the things they don't think about, huh?
So it's complicated. It's like,
Thanks. Be with you 1 second, Baron. Cliff, you had mentioned that you had a Continental hat. So if you'd like to, let me unmute you here so you can talk and you'll pop up larger. Hey, it still fits, huh? This is one of the Continental hats that we talked about last week, saying I had never seen anybody wearing one. So now life is complete. I've seen somebody wearing a Continental insurance hat.
It was a giveaway. It was Columbus Day of '64. So
Great, thanks. Oh, Baron, you wanted to let me unmute you here.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. If you could, Bill, real quick at the end of the program here, could you show that second to last picture of the post office, not the ones with the mailboxes, which actually looked pretty bad because it looked like that slope that the hill was on was not landscaped very well to display those mailboxes. But the second to the last one, where the outside tables, if you will, with the sort of valve shaped, they were valve shaped with a booth on top of them, I guess, where you would stand and you would write your postcards. That was very interesting looking, and I wanted to get a better glimpse of that, or if not, just email me the photo.
Yeah, I can do that. You should see it now, right?
Well, I see your thumbnails. We see your thumbnails.
It's not showing the whole picture?
No, we just see your thumbnails, but it's number 211
Yeah.
postoffice.jpg.
It's fun to see the whole thing. So yeah, I can send it to you. Yeah,
Yeah, if you don't mind emailing it to me.
You'd buy your postcard, go inside, buy your stamps, and of course they had a special stamp for the World's Fair.
No, I just found those little tables very interesting looking. I hadn't seen that before. I wanted to get a better glimpse at it.
Right. Greg asked me of these pavilions, which had the most revisit value. For the ones today, I'd say the two I enjoyed the most were IBM, which is probably why I spent my entire career doing computer stuff, and Small World was probably why I went to work for Disney. So one was real educational, the other was entertaining. The Small World, again, I joke with Dick Sherman all the time. When I used to go to Japan a lot for work, and very popular over there. And I brought back a watch one day and played it, and I played It's a Small World, and the Disney characters dance around on it. So Dick was like, oh my God, I didn't even know they did that. And I was joking with him about if he got royalties, and he just kind of like laughed and cried at the same time. So the next time I went over, I bought a box of 24 of these things and brought them back, and he was giving them out to people. And he said, it's great when the alarm goes off in a place, It's a Small World, everybody, kind of turns to it. So I thought Small World was a great show, and I've been lucky to see it in a bunch of other places, and I think it really went well. I mean, some of the pavilions, like Simmons, I make fun of because again, I was 12 years old. No way I wanted to go take a nap, at the World's Fair. Some of them ones, again, like the Pavilion of American Interiors. If I wanted to see furniture, if my mother wanted to see furniture, she would have gone to Macy's or Gimbel's, but you don't go to a World's Fair to walk around and look at table settings, things like that. So it's different. Joey, you have your hand up here.
Hi. Bill, as you know, many of you know, our World's Fairest group actually got into the post office a couple of years back, and there's nothing in there that is that remotely looks fair-like, but they do have the scaffold. They have the catwalks that are up on top, and the post office was later turned into the new roller rink after it came out of the New York State Pavilion, and that closed down. So Charles Abar, a good friend of many people on the site, he had painted murals that are still there to this day. It was very fascinating to get in there, and we saw quite a bit, and they were very happy to have us there.
Yeah, I wasn't able to go that day. I was supposed to go to New York and something came up and I was jealous. So I saw the pictures you guys posted and
Yeah.
it's amazing. You think about that is the World's Fair Pavilion that survived. Just looking through the, get to you 1 second, Glenn. Looking through, if you go through the chat, Martin here put in Mastro Pizza history and mentioned it's here the sad story of the industry's greatest, most tragic visionaries. If you do get a chance, if you're interested in pizza, go take a look at it because, again, the guy, I think he died when he was 46. You wonder, as big as Ray Kroc became with McDonald's, Vinnie Mastro might have been on his way to becoming the big guy for pizza. So Glenn, let me unmute you here. And I like how you've redone your office.
Yeah, I was going to say, next thing you're going to say is I didn't win the election. I stand corrected, Greg, on the small world thing, and thanks for Dave for showing that picture. I am really curious as to how that got by Marty, because they were big about that, and Walt wanted it. He wanted the show to be about the children and have it small. That's why they had it that way. But I don't know if Dick Sherman ever told you the story. When they were working on the ride, they went to lunch with Walt and he and Bob Sherman, and they were saying, we're so excited about this. We're going to donate all the proceeds, all the royalties from the Small World song to UNICEF. And he says, Walt pulled a car over and turned to them and said, you'll do no such thing. That song's going to put your kids through college. And he says, I'm really glad we didn't.
Yeah, that's why I said he didn't quite get the same royalties that, you or I wrote it because it was done, Disney ends up owning the copyright. I think it's Wonderland Music or something.
Well, they get songwriter royalties, which is, I think, half of it. Greg would know better about that than I do. Yeah. But anyway, interesting.
I'm just looking through the chat questions here. Mary Blair, again, I raced through the whole thing of Small World as far as different designs. Mary Blair's contribution, John mentioned that because we had done it previously in the Disney and the World's Fair piece. But I didn't want to bog down there too much. But I just want to point out the fact that they did wonders with an existing building and the limitations that they had, and then they improved it, and that's why it's still so popular every place else. Okay, just anyone else questions? I see Celeste and Frank Pisani were on. Frank, did you work in any of these particular shows, or were you just visitors to them?
Yeah, I'm visiting today because you're showing stuff that I was not personally involved with, but I'm really sorry I missed last week. I think I could have made some contribution regarding Coca-Cola, which was my project when I was at Welton Beckett, and then later the Better Living Pavilion, which you spoke of a couple of times today, which was done by my then partner, John Lopinto. So again, sorry I missed that one, but looking forward to more. These are great. Thank you so much.
Oh, I appreciate you joining us. Yeah, somebody mentioned here, a guy who lived in Freeport. Yeah, Guy Lombardo lived right on the canal in Freeport, and he had this really great wooden boat. I don't know if it was a Chris Craft or something else, and you'd see him out all the time. I lived in Baldwin, the next town, and we didn't have a boat, but a friend of mine did. And he'd be out, and this boat was just a classic. I mean, it was just beautiful. And he would take his boat and go from Freeport over to Jones Beach, where the amphitheater was. He'd come out, do his show, and then he'd motor back again. So his house is still, he's of course gone, the house has been resold, but there's one of those famous, here in New York, memorial placards outside his house. So if you're in Freeport, you can go there, and the street's easy to find because it's Guy Lombardo Drive or Way or Road or something. And you just drive down the street and there's the plaque for his house. It's kind of neat that, like I said, real friendly guy, just wasn't my particular taste for music. Yeah, Dave, let me click you here. There you go.
So I showed the picture, Julie Andrews it turns out Wolper was doing a pre-Walt Disney World opening video. And so Julie Andrews was there, and they were actually playing back the track, and the kids were singing the song from It's a Small World. And I was working at the time, just happened to go from the tunnels up to the It's a Small World facade area, and there was the crew and Julie Andrews. So of course, I happened to have my camera, took the snapshots. Someday I'll restore them. The color still seems pretty good, but clearly that's the way it was in 1971 in October, prior to the opening.
Oh, great. And somebody's telling me his boat was a Chris Craft, as I thought it might have been. It was called the Tempo. And Cliff is telling me that it was on Lake Opakon for a while. I didn't realize that. Cliff and I both have a huge love of Lake Opakon, New Jersey. So I've been enjoying all the pictures he posted this year of goings on at the lake, because we're not able to go there. But I didn't realize he had the boat over there at the lake. I know he kept it there at the his dock. I guess he had the money. He could go to Lake Opakon, put a boat in the water. We went to Lake Opakon. We were lucky to put our feet in the water. Anyone else? Well, we're out here enjoying the rain. Last week, Carol had to tell me to go turn off the fan and the air conditioner. It was too noisy. Now with the rain coming down, the air conditioning, I think it's 35 degrees cooler today than it was this time last week. So we're supposed to get about 4 inches of rain this week, which is our annual rainfall for a year within 3 days. So if I'm not here next week and the house is moved down the hill, I'll try to find you. So next week, I think I will probably do the federal and state area. Oh, Greg, you had your hand up here, or did you? As people come and drop on and off, it moves around. So where did Greg go? He was there a second ago waving his hand. No, I don't see him. Oh, there you are, Greg, wave. Okay, I got you. There you go.
So what I wanted to explain is what I think happened was, from the beginning, for some reason they had it. It's a Small World that way, and the front side of it was different. The ride itself was different, and it didn't match Disneyland. Part of the difference was that more of the ride through was on both sides, and it was bigger. And so I think in the early 2000s, and it may have been for the millennium, because there were some major overhauls done for the millennium, because this guide map is 91. They completely did an overhaul for It's a Small World, because in the queue area, there was a black background with just a painting of the Mary Blair kind of design. It was pretty stark in there, and it was very much like a warehouse. The walls were very, very big. The ceiling was very high. And I think my theory has always been, one of the reasons people find the song annoying isn't just because it's repetitious, but because it was presented to millions of people in Florida mostly. I don't know the California one as well, but in Florida, with improper sound quality, because it played like a gymnasium in there. It was blaring like music in a giant Sears, and it always really kind of sounded bad. So what they did is, and I think this was in the early 2000s, they completely, I think they tore it all out. They didn't change the structure of the attraction, but they put in a fantastic new sound system. It sounds much better than it ever did. And they put the clock face in with the little soldiers and the time being called out, which was never there before, little doors opening. And they changed the front. And I think when Imagineering went back in, they probably found out that there were no quotes on the title, and that it wasn't lowercase. And they probably insisted that it be done right. And they went in and had all the nomenclature changed. I am guessing that's when it all happened. I mean, I would get into nomenclature discussions with things like, they said, oh, there's no the on Haunted Mansion. And I would go there and it's like, there's a the right on the plaque. So, I mean, things like that would happen all the time.
You know, that's
But
perfect. I used to go through some of the things about all the mistakes that were in the books and things where, you know, Marty would tell you, it's not done that way. Well, Marty, you signed this memo, it's done that way. It was not done that way from today on. So,
well, you know, and God bless them. A lot of times I would also hear that the volume would be changed. I think it may have been Tony Baxter who said, I went into American Adventure and they had turned the volume down lower because there were people who complained it was too loud. And he says, that's supposed to be at a certain level. It was created to be at a certain level, and it doesn't have the impact that it's supposed to have. So, you know, once we would say once the attraction is done, the keys are handed over to operations and over to marketing. And I would always kind of be, and I always wanted everybody to kumbaya and compare notes. And when the attractions were being created and the shows and they tried, they would have brainstorms but let's talk about the titles. Let's talk, you know, because now the titles are like a paragraph long, and you know that people are going to call it things like that. Let's be more in the process together. But there's just so many people in marketing, and the players change so often. You know, there's a new marketing manager and brand manager like every 6 months because their career track is keep changing jobs. So, and ours wasn't. So I'm just explaining the background of it. So, you know, they're learning everything every 6 months. So the system kind of creates that. And so there we are saying, yeah, but here's why. And people like me who are like so Disney are saying, you know, here's why. And then you got to choose your battles, and you don't want to antagonize people. But you also want it to be done right, you know.
It's a constant challenge. I remember going through the Haunted Mansion with a couple of guys from Imagineering, and they were just livid because guys in operations had decided that they would change the lighting and some of the things in the seance room, and they had changed the music, and you know, then you get into arguments of, you know, about the, you know, where the lights are focused, the brightness of the lights. Dave, did you work on the redo of Small World, the sound that Greg's talking about?
I did not. Glenn probably knows more about that. I was involved in the animation aspect of it, but I can tell you that I started at Disney in 1967, and I was involved in the theme parks, specifically at Imagineering, until 1978. Then I went to the studio and worked for Don Iwerks. But again, the projection aspect of theme park rides until 85, and then I went to feature animation until 95. But I do know during the time I was there that there was a group at Imagineering, a quality control group, that basically would go to the park. I remember when I was working on Pirates of the Caribbean at Walt Disney World, doing that installation in 1973, that team of people would come from Imagineering, go through all of the rides and take notes. And one of the problems we had with animation is that when the shows were done, the movements were they were very spiffy and very realistic and all that. And then about a month later, the maintenance guys would go in and kind of turn down the speed of the actuators so the things didn't wear out as fast. And of course, that was like, wait a minute, it needs to be the way it was programmed. And the same thing with the sound. I mean, there was recorded levels at Walt Disney World. You could monitor every single soundtrack from the central control room. There was a separate monitoring system that took the output of the amplifier and brought it back to the central control room. So you could tell if somebody had messed with the volume control on the amplifier. And indeed they did. And then there was like, hey, wait a minute, you can't go change that. That was programmed. The show needs to maintain the quality that was initially put there. So that's my direct observation. I'm sure Glenn has some thoughts.
Well, one of my first jobs in the late 70s was to do the show quality standards program that Dave is talking about. And we would go to at that time, there was just Disney World and Disneyland. But Buddy Baker, who was the composer of so many of the songs and attractions like Haunted Mansion and Hall of President. He and I would go down there 4 times a year and go through every single attraction up and down the stairs in the hot summer and adjust the rides back to where he wanted them when we opened it. And I remember one time, one of the guys said, he says, well, it's a little loud here. And the guy says, well, it's just where you put it last time. And Buddy said, well, last time I was wrong.
Sort of like Marty being wrong by nomenclature.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he was amazing to work with. And I really admired that he would write the music, conduct the orchestra, and then care enough to go up and down those stairs and adjust it all. And I was actually still doing that until the pandemic. Back in March, I think February of this year was my last trip to Disneyland. I'd go through every single ride twice a year and work with the engineers down there and get them.
Oh, it's a tough job. Let me play my violin for you.
Yeah, you know.
Well, Glenn, that, you know, mentioning that, I didn't know you had done that specifically with Buddy. What do you think of my theory? Because I think on this, the sound has an effect on your central nervous system. And I think, you know, my theory about Small World being this annoying, not an earworm, catchy isn't a bad thing. Catchy is fine, but being an annoying song to people, I think it's a physical annoying. And I do blame the reproduction in the ride, not the song and not the orchestration.
Well, we had a lot of trouble with acoustics back in those early days. Now we have acoustic engineers full time, and we really spend a lot of effort getting things acoustically right. In other words, we like shows to be dead and not have all that reverberation. Small World originally had an acoustic ceiling in it, but after a couple of years, they painted it and it totally destroyed the acoustic absorption of the ceiling. And so that's why for years it did. It's just sounded like a big barn. And the water also went all the way out to the sets and everything, where Disneyland, it's a trough. And so you have more opportunities for absorption. But yeah, I think you're right. The other theory is that the song doesn't really have an ending, and it just loops and loops and loops. So your brain can't get closure, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's like the song your kids are saying, this is the song that never ends.
yeah.
I had 2 other people with hands up, so I'm gonna just hop up here 1 second. Darren, you're still there?
Hey, Bill, thank you. Another great presentation. Very quickly on the 7-Up Pavilion, they had little like pink things on the tables, and I'm just curious what those were. Were they menus? I just was wondering, or napkin dispensers? They seemed like a triangular design.
Yeah, they had, well, you went into 7-Up, you got a tray, and they came in different colored trays. I think I have 2 of the 4 colors or something, and out of the table, I have to look at it again to see what you're talking about. But they had little signage things about 7-Up products, and enjoy them at home. I'd have to go back and look at the picture, and when I do, I'll try to remember to drop you a note and let you know. But I'm sure they also did have napkin dispensers out there. The trouble is, if you put anything out there, though, like I'm just thinking about napkin dispensers, people would take them home. So I have to go back and look at it and see.
All right, cool. Thank you.
And those trays, by the way, are very paper thin today, and the plastic doesn't last very long on them. So, it's amazing how something from the 50s, they just don't last like they used to, And Wayne, you had a question, something? Let me unmute you here.
Yeah, I was just wanted to make sure you didn't miss the question about 7-Up. But since you mentioned the trays, I have all 4 colors in my collection, but it turns out that some of the inks they used are very light sensitive. So the ones I have on display, all the blue color is bleached out.
Okay, I'm looking at the picture here, and the things on the table are napkin dispensers, and they come. I'm looking at one here. It's a kind of a bluish one over here, and an orange one over there. So, yep, they had different color napkin dispensers, and I'm surprised nobody took them home. But I'm just checking it and can answer that question for you. So now Darren can sleep tonight. Okay, thanks, Wayne. Rich, let me unmute you here. You should be unmuted. Nope, still muted. Here, let's try this again. You should see a thing. The host is asking you to unmute. There you go.
Yeah, I was just, you should get Glenn to talk about how he went through and restored the original tracks and everything to remix the stuff for Small World.
Well, I mentioned that, I think, in the previous ones, that when we
Oh,
did
okay.
that, when we did that CD set for the World's Fair, we pulled the vault masters and discovered that they had been recorded in multi-track. So we had separate, you know, woodwinds and brass and percussion and strings. So we were able to remix and kind of create a stereo imaging thing with those tracks. And the tracks that had been playing at Disneyland and in New York was just mixed down to mono. And back then, every time you would do something, you would make a copy of it and another copy and another copy. So you can imagine it's like taking a Xerox of a picture and going down and down. So the quality would degrade a lot. So we took those original masters, pulled them back into our digital systems and completely remixed it, and then went to the park and sat in the ride for about 3 or 4 days, scene by scene, mixing the sound through the actual system in the attraction. And that's what gave us what we have today, which I think holds up to a lot of things that are being recorded today. And fortunately, we were able to send those tracks all over the world. And I think Paris still is playing the new version, which was done because the original tracks were so bad that we knew. So we did a whole new score for the Paris show. But now Florida, Hong Kong, Japan, and Disneyland all have those original tracks that played at the New York Fair. And over the years, we were able to do that with a number of shows, which really improved them all. A Haunted Mansion, the Enchanted Tiki Room, a lot of the, you know, those original tracks, Pirates, we've gone back and remastered them all. So I'm glad that I walked away feeling good about where we left everything. And now I just have to keep the levels right.
Hey, Glenn, did they ever redo the control system for Tiki Birds, or is it still the room full of clicking relays in the basement?
No, that's all been redone. It's all on computer. We use the SMPTE time code now, which was, the first use of that was locking the two machines together for Carousel of Progress in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And then they still use the code called DAX, which Dave can talk about. We don't want to get too deep technically here, but anyway, it was a time code that lived on the track, and then the computers would follow the show based on that. And then eventually we switched over to the SMPTE time code, which is still an industry standard from the 70s to today.
Yeah, so I started in '76. It was still amazing. I went down the basement of Tiki Birds, and everything's just, you know, clacking and clicking away, and, you know, guys running around adjusting stuck relays for this one or that one. And then you go to the Haunted Mansion and 10 machines running around, and, you know, things were so different back in that point in time.
Yeah, there was a 1-inch 14-track tape, and 3 of the tracks had these tones that's where audio animatronics comes from. It was audio tones on the tape, and it would be different frequencies that didn't interact with each other harmonically. So they could have like 9 different frequencies on each track, and they would be filtered off and then sent to the different control things. And that was where all the relays and all that kind of stuff. Now it's just one track of time code, and there's no tape anywhere in the parks. We don't even have moving. We had CDs for a while, and now those are all gone. Everything is just solid state digital, which you don't have to, you know, it doesn't break.
Yeah, I remember, you know, seeing the tape bins down at Dax Central, and, you know, all the stuff. Something would break and have to run around and change it. And then, as Dave mentioned, the monitor. I got such a real kick. It was just, as Dave mentioned, the monitor board and everything. It was like a touch tone phone. You could just go and say, I want to listen to, you know, 187, and you'd hear, you know, the creaking doors in a Haunted Mansion. Then you go 459 or whatever, and it'd be the crackling of fire and the Pirates. Then, you know, it was amazing that that was all out there. And as Dave said, let me unmute you. Everything out there was so discreet and everything set to its own individual level that you could just sit there in the basement and be listening to, oh, over here, oh, I'm listening to music in the elevators at the Contemporary. It was a crazy spot.
The engineer that at the time that was doing the audio, his name was Ed Chisholm. And so, I mean, Walt Disney World was a revolutionary achievement. Disney had never built another theme park other than Disneyland. And most, like the Tiki Birds, the people from the studio sound department literally drove down to Disneyland and installed it. And as Glenn said, it used reed relays that would respond to certain tones on the tape. One of the other things that they did is they just did brute force, where the animation had a voice coil from a speaker, and they had this huge power amplifier that was just driving the voice coil, and it was connected to the animation. And I mean, literally, the sound was being amplified to the point where it would move that device, and that device was hooked to a mechanism that you could actually see move. The relays that you were hearing were digital. Those were digital functions, and they used an air valve. So it was pneumatically operated with a digital on and off versus the analog function that you could get from a speaker voice coil. But I mentioned Ed Chisholm's name because the concept of having a central control room with 9 different satellite rooms was foreign to Disney. When Disneyland was built, there was a sound room in each attraction, not a centralized area. And the problem that they had in those days, it was 1/4-inch tape or 35 millimeter mag tape, is that you needed to have maintenance. The tape heads needed to be cleaned, tapes would break. And so the idea was, well, let's have all that in one central place. In order to have that monitoring work, Ed and the team of engineers, and I was part of that group, went to Altec Lansing and another company and had them build a specialized amplifier that had a output that would drive the loudspeakers. And then it had a monitoring output that was a low-level output. And so all of those 9 sound rooms fed with cabling back to a central room where that monitoring output was available. And you're right, I actually worked on the design of that rack unit that Disney built. We built our own system where you could key up the touch tone, and Haunted Mansion was in room 1. Then it started with the digit 1, and there was up to 999 tracks. So 1001, you key that in, and you could listen to Madame Leota on the, on the seance. But with time, of course, tapes then went to CDs, and then CDs got displaced with enough computer memory. And so today, they don't have that. You don't have the need for a centralized room, and attractions are built differently. But in any case, it was an interesting time,
Well, luckily, they never tried to do the 8-track version.
Right.
Well, the cartridges actually looked very similar to those.
Yeah.
That were used for the smaller types shows, like the dark rides and things. Anything that had multi-tracks, like a Tiki Room or something, that was all done on multi-channel tapes.
One of the things we used the monitoring for was to troubleshoot tapes that were broken and cartridges that needed to be replaced. And my job was to replace the cartridges and duplicate those and keep them running.
Yeah, we used to use cartridges like those at a radio station. As Joe
right.
8-track, how they would jump up and down, the heads would move and never work right. But
the people that built our machines, in fact, that was the market that we went to, because we needed something that would run basically 7 days a week, 18 hours a day. And as Rich said, the tapes would break. But somebody could call in from the attraction and say, this isn't working. And the person there at the console could walk up to the monitor system, and you could see, you were there, so you could see the tape was running. and you could patch in a headset and see that the output of the tape was there. Then you could dial up and listen to it at the loudspeaker, well, at the amplifier, and you could see, oh, the amplifier, something between the tape machine and the amplifier is broken, usually the amplifier. And then they could call a person up that would go out there and there's spare equipment and could put it in. So there was very much, and to this day, I'm sure, this whole thought that you don't want people to go through the ride and not have it work. You've got to make sure that it gets fixed either right away or that night. I mean, things like the spotlight on Mr. Lincoln, there's a monitoring system that detects if the lamp has burnt out or not. And if the lamp burns out, a spare spotlight that's aiming at him gets turned on. Like same with the 10 by 10 like effects projectors, there's a spare lamp that if that lamp burns out by gravity, a new lamp pops into place. So the quality at the Disney parks for us doing the technical work was always very rewarding, and yet it had to be working all the time. That was the philosophy.
Well, that's
I
how,
used to have to make those tapes, the multi-track tapes like Bear Band and Lincoln and Carousel of Progress and Small World. And they would order them and usually have to set up and sit there and listen to Small World all day to make these multi-track tapes and then ship them down. And it never failed that right before a holiday, I'd get this panic call. We just used up our last Bear Band tape. We need more. So I'd have to stay and make these tapes and ship them. So I don't miss that part of the job.
you think they would have something like, maybe we ought to make them every 3 months because we know what sort of period they were out by?
Well, yeah. And the other thing is, I always thought there might be time bombs, because if I had made a mistake on the tape and then it was the last one, they put it in, they wouldn't have a show. There would be nothing they could do. But so that kept me awake at night. But fortunately, that happened. It did.
I just have two questions based on that. Can you hear me? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
One is, Glenn, you were talking about the impulses on the 2 tracks of the 14-track tape. When back in the day when we had film strips in elementary school, and you had the side of the record that had the little ding, and you were like a god when you got to turn the frame on the projector. If the teacher picked you, you really felt great. But then they got those automatic ones where the record had the inaudible signal. Is that the same principle that audio animatronics use, an inaudible signal on the tape that made things move? That's what.
Yeah, there's two things.
Well,
the tones that went to most of the control were all frequencies that you could hear, but they didn't go through loudspeakers. They just went directly to the control. So that's all they did was control things. But we had what they call mouth control, where you wanted a really tight synchronization. And that was a 12 kilohertz signal, which was pretty high frequency. And that would be filtered off so it wouldn't go into the speaker, which meant that the highest frequency you could hear in the ride was about 8 kilohertz, which is not as high as you really want to get. But that 12 kilohertz tone was sent directly to control a mouth, usually something that you wanted really tight sync with. So then that may be how they did the text films. I don't know. I'm not familiar with how those worked. If they had a
Well, if you play a Teddy Ruxpin or a Talking Mickey cassette in a regular stereo, you'll hear machine noise in one of the sides too. That's probably the same idea. The other thing I wanted to mention is I was down in what they call DAX, where I'm assuming in the tunnel where you guys worked, and I saw the equipment back in the day. Weren't they the same carts that they used in radio stations originally for like Haunted Mansion and stuff with all those?
Yes,
with the little thing that changed, made it reset.
Well, yeah, the way it worked was they were broadcast cartridges. They were 2-track, 7.5 inches per second, whereas your car ones were all, I think, 3 3/4. And so it was a higher quality 2-channel cartridge, and that's what all of the radio stations used. Of course, we'd buy a machine that had 5, they call it a 5-deck, so there were 5 slots in it. And they would always wear out. They would wear out, and so we'd have the company come in, and we showed them, and they said, well, geez, we're expecting only 1 to play at a time, like on a radio. And here we'd put 5 cartridges in there and run it for 24 hours a day. Dave. I'm sorry, I don't mean to take your job away, Bill.
What I was going to say was, so to answer your question, so for things like Madame Leota in Haunted Mansion, the tape that Glenn is talking about, there was a general soundtrack that might play. For Haunted Mansion, that I don't think that was the case. Let's take a different example. Let's take Pirates of the Caribbean. So there was a multi-track tape machine that played with Yo Ho, Yo Ho, that song. But the individual, like the guy with the pigs that says, here, piggy, 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 that was a 1/4-inch tape. And so the synchronizing track that was on the multi-track went to the computer system and said, start this tape. And then that tape would run for a minute and have to be restarted every time, because those soundtracks, when you go through, those tracks are synced with the main soundtrack. So you've got the main soundtrack playing Yo Ho, Yo Ho, and then you got all these little tapes. And on that B track, the A track had the sound, here, piggy, piggy, piggy. On the B track, if you listen to it, you'd hear this beep, 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 beep. Those went to a decoder that was only sensitive to that frequency. And that signal then got sent to the animation system, and out in the ride, in the case of Florida, 1/4 mile away, that signal was decoded and it went to an air valve, and that air valve was plumbed to the mouth of the pirate that was saying, here, piggy, 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 and would operate his eye blinks or, things to go with that particular piece of animation. So
yeah, originally Pirates was all on 1/4-inch cartridges. There was no multi-track tape in it. And one cartridge would be the music in the Burning City. And then all the rest of them were the singers, and they were all, and they did their best to try to synchronize them. But because they were on cartridges, they drift apart a little bit. So every minute they would all come to a stop. There was one tone on the tape that would make all the cartridges stop, and then they'd all be started again by a CAM machine. And so that would keep it pretty good for about a minute. But if you listened in those days, you could hear they were pretty getting off, by the time that, and then eventually we added a multi-track tape and put everything in sync much
so
better.
I was talking about the Walt Disney World implementation of that. And things like Madame Leota, that was different. Again, the studio built that control system. So they had a 16mm projector in the show that was projecting up through a mirror and out on actually it was a periscope that was projecting on the inside of the ball. And in order to keep that sound in sync, understand that the projector is not a 1/4 mile, but quite a ways away in the Haunted Mansion building and projecting the image. But the sound is coming from the central control room, where the sound from Leota was on the A track.
Mm-hmm.
And the B track actually had a 60 hertz, that's the power line frequency,
right,
tone recorded. And in that rack, there was a synchronizer that would pick up on that 60 hertz tone signal and drive the tape machine motor to make sure that that motor was running exactly at the right speed, because those tapes are driven by a roller, a pinch roller, and there's some slippage that occurs between the roller and the tape. And so to keep that in sync, you got to make sure that the tape is actually running at 60 hertz. Now in the projector in the show, it's a motor that's running. It's a synchronous motor, so it runs at 60 hertz, and the projector mechanism is pulling the film at 60 hertz. So one of the interesting problems we had at the opening of the park is that Madame Leota would not stay in sync. The voice was out of sync with the picture. And we're like, this worked fine when it was tested. Why is it not working here? And Ed Chisholm, brilliant guy, said, there's got to be some reason. So he rigged up an oscilloscope that took the signal that was coming from the pavilion, that power, he transformed it down so we could send it on the lines, the low-level lines. And we took the power in the central control room and put the two of them on an oscilloscope. And you could see that one was drifting versus the other. I realize this is super technical, but the gist of it is,
I think we're losing them.
Okay, it turned out that the central controlled area was on this super duper clean power coming from a turbine generator that had been built specifically to run computers and that kind of sensitive stuff at Walt Disney World. And at the opening of the park, the thing that was supposed to keep that generator, that big steam generator, running in sync with the Florida power was not working. And Bob DeVille was the engineer at the time. And I got him to come over to the central control room and I said, your steam generator plant is not running in sync with power. And he said, that's impossible. I said, okay, well, look at this. And I showed him what Ed had rigged up. He says, that's impossible. I said, watch this. I unplugged the cabinet and I plugged it into an extension cord that was running from the same power source as the Haunted Mansion. And it fixed the problem. And he says, well, you can't just run that on the extension cord. And I said, well, it's going to stay on that cord until you fix the problem. So it took a while. And the fix was we had to run conduit under the computer floor, provide a circuit from the dirty power, which was Florida power. And that tape machine ran like that, as far as I know, until they took the tape machine out. But one of those things, like I was saying about Small World, that this stuff is complicated. And it just, you've got to be committed to finding the problem and fixing it. And so working with Glenn and Rich and other people was exciting.
Well, to point out that there were only a few that we relied on 60 hertz to work. Most of the film shows had interlocked 35 millimeter magnetic film, which was a tape, if you will, with sprocket holes that would synchronize perfectly with a film projector. And some of those machines in the central audio there were what we call bin loops. Don Iwerks invented this bin loop machine, which was an endless loop of film that would go over these rollers and stay in sync. And you'd start it in the morning and it would run all day perfectly. And so all the big shows like Hall of Presidents and even the singing busts in the Haunted Mansion, they were all interlocked with that. So we didn't rely on that 60 hertz. Gordon Cooper, remember that one? That was another one we never could get right.
It was only the two Leotas in Haunted Mansion and I think one or two others. But yeah. Glenn is right. And for those that want to know more about the continuous bin loops, Don Iwerks' book has published this book about how that was invented and why that all came to be. It's an amazing, amazing story.
Yeah, Dave, you've created a real problem now. Now that you've explained how Madame Leota works, all these people on the call, I've got to go and arrange to have them killed.
With what?
Okay. All right. It's magic. I challenge anybody to get it to work as well as it does.
Yeah, it kind of took away all the magic at a ride.
Yeah.
You took away all the magic at a ride from me now.
When I worked in the magic shop, Merlin's Magic Shop is one of my first jobs at Disneyland, and people would come in and ask if we had a book that talked about the holograms in the Haunted Mansion. And I'd say, no, those are real ghosts, you know. We never gave it away.
Well, Yale Gracie gets the credit for that, you know, working in basically so many other things, so many illusions that when you walk up and having worked on Haunted Mansion, one of the things that's just really eerie is when you walk in through this corridor before you get on the ride and there's these looks like paintings, but they're actually a reverse image of a face.
Right.
And it looks like
Yeah.
it is real. It's just
If
really
you
well
haven't,
done.
if you haven't seen them already, Leslie Iwerks did a beautiful set of shows called The Imagineering Story that is on the Disney Plus.
Disney Plus. Yeah, it's
And
beautiful.
there are about 6 of them, I think. I'm in about 3 of them for 15 seconds. But there's a lot of information there about the history of the parks, and it does get into some technical stuff. And then Dan Heaton.
We watched him, and my wife said, "Hey, I know him." So you're famous, Glenn.
Dan Heaton, who I don't know if he's still on here, he does a thing called the Tomorrow Society podcast. And if you just Google that, he's got, gosh, I think there must be over 100 different Disney folks giving their whole life story. And I did one of those. If you really want to get bored, play that. You'll learn all about the history of the sound and how we did it all together.
Great. Well, I don't want to cut people short, but I need to get on to things today. Appreciate everybody joining, and it's always fascinating. Real quick, do you guys remember real quick the mini DAX system they set up with the pirate with the cat? They were trying to, again, figure out how to take some of these variables out and make things synchronize more. So they had put together a system of a pirate that goes, "Here, kitty, kitty," and they were just running it 24 hours a day to figure out what the mean time between failure this thing was. It was so weird to be the only guy like walking through the warehouse, and you know the entire building's quiet at night. Walking back out to your car, and you just hear from the shadows, "Here, kitty, kitty, kitty," and that guy just sat in the corner going over and over. So when you were talking about the piggy thing, I just keep the mini DAX guy, and when I'd walk through the warehouse, I'd kind of go the other side because he'd just be sitting over there. "Here, kitty, kitty, kitty." You come in the morning, "Here, kitty, kitty." You go home at night, "Here." As bad as Small World would be to listen to, having to work near the kitty guy was even worse. So,
Can you just remind us again where to find these recordings so we can play them back later?
oh, these recordings are always it's the same one you got the address to come here today. So worldsfairphotos.com/Zoom. I have them all alphabet in a chronological date, which I can't believe the first one was April 25th. Goodness. All the way down. So each of them are listed there. So worldsfairphotos.com/Zoom.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Great. Next week, I'm going to do the federal and state area at the World's Fair. So we're going to see Mr. Lincoln for the Disney fans and talk some about that. Also, some of the other pavilions like the U.S. Pavilion, just amazing physical structure. As I've been putting all these together, I keep seeing pictures that I wanted to use that I can't because there are all these construction photos. So probably in about 2-3 weeks time, I'll do the building and demolition of the fair and all sorts of examples of what it took to make things like the bell system and the U.S. Pavilion afloat in air, that sort of stuff. So thank you everybody for joining us, and look forward to seeing you next week as we'll go visit Mr. Lincoln and we'll go visit some of the other pavilions. So thanks all for coming. I hope everybody has a great week.
Okay, thank you. See you Saturday.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.